Coming up today, South Korea's rival parties have reached a consensus on how to form the 20th National Assembly. The main opposition party will take the prize speaker position. China says it has told North Korea that it wants a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula. Beijing also says it's committed to fully enforcing UN sanctions against Pyongyang's nuclear and missile programs. Plus, the South Korean government establishes a $9.5 billion fund to help finance its massive corporate restructuring drive. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome. It's 6 a.m. on Thursday, June 9th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom and you're tuned in to our early morning edition of Arirang News. We are going to start with domestic politics. This morning, Korea's rival political parties have finally reached a compromise on how to fill key posts for the new National Assembly. The highly coveted Speaker's seat will go to the main opposition, Minju Party of Korea. Ji Myung-gil starts us off.
After months-long negotiations, the top three in-house political parties reached a compromise over who should take the prized National Assembly Speaker's seat.
The Minju Party of Korea will take the Speaker's seat. The Saenuri Party and the People's Party will each take the two Vice Speaker seats.
The three parties plan to hold a general meeting on Thursday to field candidates for their relative speaker positions. Once the candidates are settled, the three parties will hold a voting session to elect the speaker and the two vice speakers. The speaker's post is second in line after the president of the country and has the authority to introduce bills for a vote without first going through parliamentary committees under certain conditions. The three parties' top negotiators also agreed on how to allocate the chairmanship posts of 18 standing committees. The ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition Minju Party of Korea will each chair 8 committees, while the minor opposition People's Party will chair 2 committees. The ruling and main opposition parties took 3 important parliamentary committees. The Saenuri Party will chair 2 of them, which are the Legislation Committee and the Steering Committee. The Minju Party will chair the Budgetary Committee. The three parties also agreed to further discuss on how many lawmakers will be allocated to relative committees.
Deputy floor leaders will further discuss the number of lawmakers to be fixed in each committee.
Lawmakers will also vote on the chairmanship posts of all the committees on June 13th. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
China has reportedly told its longtime ally North Korea that it wants a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula. Emerging from talks in Beijing on Wednesday, South Korea's nuclear envoy to the six-party talks, Kim Hong-gyun, said his Chinese counterpart Woo Da-wei relayed to him that China's stance was explained to North Korea's vice chairman of the Workers' Party, Lee Soo-yong, when he made an unexpected visit to China last week. Chinese media had earlier reported that President Xi Jinping had told Lee that Beijing is clear and consistent on the issue of the Korean Peninsula, but did not confirm whether denuclearization was brought up. The South Korean envoy added that Seoul and Beijing agreed to cooperate on the full implementation of UN sanctions against North Korea. The North Korean delegation's visit had raised speculation China and North Korea were trying to mend ties by setting aside the nuclear issue. There are now clear indications North Korea plans to pursue its nuclear weapons program in defiance of international sanctions. Seoul is closely watching movements at the North's nuclear facility with, quote, grave concern. Hwang Ho-jun reports.
Economic sanctions and worldwide criticism don't appear to be enough to counter North Korea's craving for nuclear power. The South Korean government responded to the recent news on North Korea operating its nuclear facilities in Yongbyon, but said that Pyongyang's continued efforts to produce plutonium is no news.
The government is watching the relevant movements closely with serious concern. We are also closely cooperating with the US government on all related matters.
This comes a day after the International Atomic Energy Agency announced that recent satellite imagery indicates North Korea has likely resumed activity at its main Yongbyon plant, located about 90 kilometers north of Pyongyang. On Tuesday local time, a senior U.S. State Department official confirmed that North Korea has indeed restarted reprocessing spent nuclear fuel to harvest plutonium. The State Department official, who wanted to remain anonymous, told Reuters that Washington is concerned about the North's latest activities. Also reacting to the news, China reiterated its stance on pursuing denuclearization and stability within the Korean Peninsula.
We hope all parties can work hard together to put the nuclear issue back on the track of dialogue and negotiations.
If North Korea has restarted reprocessing activity, it would violate the existing international sanctions it is under. The Yongbyon facility has long been the source of plutonium for North Korea's nuclear weapons program. It was shut down in 2007, but Pyongyang vowed to reactivate all its nuclear facilities in 2013 and announced Yongbyon was fully operational in 2015. The communist state has conducted 2 nuclear tests since 2013, including what it claims was an H-bomb test in January this year, with the goal of improving the quality and quantity of its nuclear weapons program. North Korea's clear defiance of UN Security Council's resolutions is likely to incur even stronger international actions against the regime. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
South Korean businessmen have asked for a permit to enter the now shut-down joint industrial complex in Kaesong. The companies were forced to leave behind their assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Their request, however, was met with a firm no due to the current political climate on the Korean Peninsula. Connie Kim reports.
The Emergency Committee for Companies at the now-closed Kaesong Industrial Complex is seeking permission to enter the facility and check their equipment before the rainy season starts. The request by 29 South Korean businessmen was made in protest against the government support plan announced last month, which includes loan extensions, one-on-one consulting, and insurance payouts for the raw materials and finished goods left in the industrial park when it was closed earlier this year. The companies have been demanding compensation for their losses, saying the government's measures are not the solution.
Companies in the Kaesong Industrial Complex must bring out raw materials and finished products to cut their losses from the situation, for which we did not receive actual compensation. We want to enter Kaesong.
Seoul estimates that assets worth some $799 million are still in the industrial park, but said it's inappropriate for the companies to enter the north at such a sensitive time.
South Korea and the international community are tightening sanctions on North Korea with the aim of denuclearizing Pyongyang. The North has invalidated all agreements between the two Koreas and announces confiscating all South Korean assets in the park.
Seoul shut down the last remaining symbol of inter-Korean economic cooperation in February and made it clear the Kaesong complex would not reopen unless Pyongyang showed it was willing to take meaningful steps toward denuclearization. The Emergency Committee says the other Kaesong companies will join the request for entry permission in the near future as part of their efforts to normalize operations at the complex. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, the Bank of Korea will be holding its fiscal monetary meeting today to decide on the future direction of the benchmark interest rate. The key rate has been held steady at 1.5% for 11 straight months. And as things stand, a majority of experts predict the rate will stay unchanged. They point to variables in the global financial markets, such as the US Federal Reserve's scheduled meeting next week and Britain's vote on whether to stay in or leave the European Union. But some say a rate cut may still be possible in order to prop up the nation's recovery efforts in light of the ongoing corporate restructuring drive. And the Korean government has laid out its blueprint for its corporate restructuring drive. It includes a massive fund to support state-run banks that are likely to be saddled with huge amounts of debt in the process. Hwang Ji-ae has the details.
The Korean government and the central bank will create a recapitalization fund worth around $9.5 billion to expand the capital base of state banks, those being Korea Development Bank and Korea Exim Bank. The fund will allow banks to withstand the losses they're likely to incur when restructuring the country's ailing shipping and shipbuilding industries.
The recapitalization fund will have a limit of $9.5 billion established with loans provided by the BOK as well as government contributions. We plan to use it to buy cocoa bonds issued by the state-run banks.
The cocoa bonds, or contingent convertibles, are basically the riskiest debt issued by banks that are automatically converted to equity under set conditions. So if the fund buys these cocoa bonds issued by state banks, it would ease the pressure on state-owned lenders that have high debt exposure to shipbuilders. The government is planning to launch the fund next month and operate it through the end of next year. Apart from the fund that will indirectly support the banks, the finance ministry will directly inject around $850 million of capital into the Korea Exim Bank this year. The finance minister also once again emphasized that the principle of the overhaul is that the companies implement their own reform plans and take responsibility of losses incurred. Korea's top three shipbuilders, Hyundai Heavy Industries, Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, and Samsung Heavy Industries have all come up with plans to downsize by selling off properties and laying off workers. Hanjin Shipping and Hyundai Merchant Marine companies in another major sector of restructuring plan to finalize talks on cutting charter rates with ship owners by the end of this week. Hwang Ji, Arirang News.
Now staying with economic news, and the International Monetary Fund says Korea faces a number of structural headwinds from low productivity to high dependence on exports, and has highlighted the need for reforms and further fiscal policies to support the restructuring drive. Kim Min-ji reports.
Korea's growth potential is heading downhill in the face of uncertainties at home and abroad. That's according to Kalpana Kochar, the deputy director in the Asian Pacific Department of the IMF, who is in Seoul for meetings with government officials and economic policymakers.
The first factor is that labor input is declining. Korea is aging, and therefore the amount of labor that is going into the production of output is declining. The second major factor is productivity. Korea has some of the most productive manufacturing industries, but the service sector productivity really lags the frontier, lags the OECD comparators.
She stressed the need for the country to renew tripartite negotiations for labor market reform to prop up productivity and lift the country's growth potential. The IMF holds talks with member countries on an annual basis to review economic developments and fiscal policies. In light of the government's corporate restructuring drive, the IMF officials said given the country's low public debt, Korea should push for supportive fiscal policies to cushion the negative impact.
We do see the need for more accommodative and supportive policies in the near term, not only because the economy is weak, but also because corporate restructuring in the short term could have negative effects because it may involve people being laid off, etc. So we have called for additional fiscal stimulus this year, and we feel that a monetary policy easing that is coordinated with this fiscal stimulus could provide very strong support for the economy and could be the way to lift this economy's growth.
She warned that early withdrawal of fiscal support could take a toll on the country's private consumption. The IMF expects the Korean economy to grow 2.7% this year, revised down from an earlier forecast of 2.9%. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Local prosecutors have accused Volkswagen Korea of submitting falsified data to Korea's government agencies for around 2 years. According to the Supreme Prosecutor's Office on Wednesday, the test result Volkswagen submitted to the Korea Energy Agency were carbon emission rigged. Prosecutors add Volkswagen tampered with 48 test result documents that were presented to the agency from June 2012 to October 2014. The test results from the German headquarters differed from those presented to the Korean government. A total of 26 Volkswagen models are under scrutiny, including the Golf 2.0 TDI for tampering with test results. Well, that's all we have for now on this Thursday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you, as always, for watching. We'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Until then, goodbye.